Hi, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to our INSEAD webinar, Networking in Our New Reality. My name is Nidla Januszkis, and I'm the Associate Dean of Advancement at INSEAD and your moderator for today. With that, I want to go ahead and introduce our faculty member, our speaker and presenter, Noah Askin, who is the Assistant Professor of Organizational Behavior at INSEAD and based in France. He directs and teaches multiple executive education programs, in addition to teaching in the MBA program, specifically in organizational design and leadership core courses. His research revolves around using networks as a lens to view various things and has spent the last 10 years really working on networking, which, as you know, is the topic of our webinar today. I'm personally very fascinated by this topic, but also I think it's relevant to so many of us. So I'm very excited to learn more. So let's start. Noah, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nida. Very much appreciated. I am going to share my screen. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. Good afternoon. There we go. Excellent. Okay. Again, thank you for coming. My name is Noah Askin. I'm an assistant professor of organizational behavior, as Nida said. And I wanted to talk about this because, you know, our new reality varies depending on where you might be at the moment. And really, I think it's important to be thoughtful about, you know, what are the things that we need to be thinking when we're trying to actually establish our social capital, to grow our network, and to really, you know, push our careers and frankly our personal lives forward when we may be in confinement, we may be having to socially distance, our offices may be in a little bit of a different position or setup than they were before. You know, you're probably working remotely more regularly. If you do go to the office, you're going to be separated. And so the idea is to give you some tips and tricks and some ideas to be thoughtful about as you think about growing your network. And I will say there's no like magic bullet here. The idea is to give you basically 3 or 4 main ideas for you to take away. These slides are fairly text heavy because the idea is that hopefully you'll be able to take these away. I'm going to post them on my website. I think INSEAD will probably have them posted somewhere. And you can really take these and use them almost as guidelines for thinking about how to network going forward. So that's my hope. Let's dive in. And I'd like to start with a little bit of a check-in. You can use your phone and scan in the QR code, or just go to menti.com, your computer, your iPad, your tablet, whatever. If you want to go there, I wanted to ask a couple questions just to get a sense of who you are and kind of where we are, what we're thinking about networking. So let's turn over to that. So starting here, where are you logging in from today? Home. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it. And you'll see that, you know, this is predominantly the INSEAD network. And you'll see, you know, it's global. That's not surprising. For those of you that are in the INSEAD network, you know that that's one of the things that we pride ourselves on. But one of the things that's important to remember about this is your network is global. And you've got people that are signing into this that are interested in networking more generally from all over the world. And so I want you to keep that in mind. And, you know, oftentimes we have a strong negative reaction to networking. And part of the reason for that is we feel like other people, we might be bothering other people. They don't want to talk to us. It feels inauthentic. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But know that lots of people are open to it. People understand it. People know that it's part of your professional lives. And there's a genuine interest and curiosity in it. So as you see this popping up, and it's great to see people from all over the place, you know, keep in mind there's people all over the world that have this interest and are curious about this more. Okay, that's question one. We got a nice array of where people are from. Getting more specifically into the current topic, what one word comes to mind when you hear the word network? And that can be the verb network, to network, that can be the noun. What is it that comes to mind? What's the first thing that you think? You know, rejection was one of the first ones put up there. You know, yes, connection, people, business, work. You know, those are the sort of the typical ones. Difficult, and there's a range. And you know, people range from thinking it's fake, I saw that pop up there, hard, to thinking that this is crucial and important and it's absolutely essential that I do this all the time and it's all about other people. And part of the idea today, and what I'm going to try to instill, is that you change your framing of networking from this kind of dirty, I don't want to do this, it feels inauthentic or challenging, to something that becomes a practice and part of your social repertoire and part of your professional life. Again, a nice word cloud there: opportunities, connections, relationships, engagement, right? These are the upsides of things. Of course, there are some challenges and difficulties, but good to get a sense of that. And then finally, bringing it to sort of the current state. Which of these three options best describes your approach to networking, or how you felt about your own network since the start of the COVID crisis sometime in March? Focused on smaller, tighter network. You know, these are all people that you already knew. It's about the same as before. Or you've actually engaged in expanding or growing your network from where it was when you started. If you are having difficulty with Menti or anything like that, we're going to be switching back to the slides in just a second. Okay, and what you see, the distribution here is not all that surprising. It's a little surprising that you know, a third of you have actually engaged in growing and expanding your network. That's great to see. Most times in crisis, especially when we are much more isolated, we tend to fall back on what we're used to. We fall back to the people that we're closest with, our team, that's who we primarily stay in touch with, family, closest friends, things like that. And so the fact that the majority, you know, about half are on the focused on tighter, smaller network, that's not surprising at all. And so, you know, my reason for asking this is just to get a sense of where are people coming from as far as their current networking situation. So we've got a nice sense of where you are physically, how you feel about networks and networking, and a little bit of your current approach. And so let's keep that in mind as we go back to the slides and start to think about kind of networking and networks more generally. What I hope that you leave with today are basically four main ideas. And like I said, there's going to be some detailed checklists and some things for you to really take away as to-dos. But the four main ideas: habit formation and goals are going to be essential here, right? This is not something you're going to want to leave to chance. It's not something that you're going to say, well, I'll do it when I have time for it. You're going to have to carve out time and create a habit around it. Number two, you must do your homework. I'll tell you exactly what I mean by that, but part of this involves doing your work on your end. Number three, get your weak ties to come to you, right? I'm gonna propose that you, all of you out there, try to host office hours, taking a page from academia. And then finally, now's a great time, if this is not something that you've already done, to build your personal board of directors. So those are your four big takeaways. But it's worth asking, why network? Presumably, you're all connected to INSEAD. This shouldn't necessarily be something that is surprising to you. It should be pretty obvious. But just in case, you know, you as an individual have more or less two types of personal capital, right? You've got your human capital, that's your knowledge, your skills, and you've got your social capital. It's connections and disconnections, and I'll explain why in just a minute, amongst the people that you know. And over the course of your career, one of these is going to matter a lot more, regardless of where you are right now. And you can guess by the fact that I'm talking about networking, and this is an OB professor talking at you here, that it's going to be social capital that matters more over the course of your career. And my reason for saying that is not that human capital doesn't matter. It absolutely does. The problem is, as you move forward and you advance in your career and you move up hierarchies in organizations, the difference or the variance in human capital doesn't necessarily vary that much. The variance shrinks across different levels of organizations as you move up. What doesn't shrink, and the variance is much greater, within social capital. And so what differentiates someone's likelihood of getting put on the better projects, or someone's likelihood of getting promoted, if the human capital is more or less the same, if those are the table stakes just to get in, what's the differentiator? Your social capital. Who knows you, who likes you, who wants to work with you, who wants to put you on their team. So again, this is not to discount human capital, but it's just to say, going forward, wherever you are in your career, social capital is going to be what has a stronger impact on your promotions and your advancement. And the difficulty with social capital is, unlike human capital, which you possess, when you leave, you take your human capital with you wherever you go, and new organizations, new roles, new teams, your knowledge and your skills don't really diminish. your social capital very much can. It's not that you lose the contacts, although those tend to decay over time. It's that if you've ever left a job before and started somewhere new, those contacts from your old job don't do you a whole lot of good in your new role. And so the idea is not that the connections suddenly disappear and social capital is useless. It's that your social capital in that particular context no longer has nearly the same weight. And so over the course of your career, your social capital is going to fluctuate a lot more, especially as you move, you advance, you join new teams. And so it's worth being cognizant of this fact. Every time you start someplace new, you have to reestablish that social capital. This is oftentimes why CEOs that are hired externally struggle in new positions and new roles. They could be amazing turnaround artists, and yet when they come to their new role, a new organization, they don't know who all the right people are. They don't have the connections, the social capital. They don't know where the bodies are buried. And so it's very difficult to get things done, no matter how effective you are and how strong your skill set is. So networking is about building your social capital. It's going to be super, super important to you. And if it's important, how much time are you investing in it on a regular basis? Maybe not hours per day. That might seem frivolous. Maybe not even hours per week, although possibly, but at least hours per month. How much time are you dedicating to this if it's going to be the leverage that you get over the course of your career moving forward? And so that's part of the idea here, is to think about your balance of investing in human capital and just being great at what you do versus investing in social capital. And I'm not saying be overly political. I'm just saying make connections, start talking to people, get them to know you, get to know them, and that's going to help develop your social capital. Okay. And where does social capital come from? Well, I'm going to talk about two network properties. And I should say that the two properties I'm going to talk about are, first of all, they're extremes. So you'll very rarely find either types of these network structures in their pure form. And secondly, these are the structures here are really topics for extended classes. And my purpose is not to really dive deeply into them. It's just to give you a sense of different types of network structures and kind of what you're looking for and where value comes from. And so on one hand, you have closure. Closure, think of your core team at work, think of your closest group of friends, your family unit, everybody's connected, everybody knows each other, there's a lot of trust that goes on. This is how you establish your reputation. There's a lot of mutual agreement on things and a lot of trust because tends to be a lot of similarity, right? These are your closest friends. If you look at your 5 or so closest friends, chances are, not for everybody, but chances are they look a lot like you in their values, their socioeconomic status, their education level, where they live, things like that. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Again, part of the reason we're drawn to each other is there's a phenomenon we in sociology called homophily, homo meaning the same, phily meaning liking, right? We're drawn to people that are like us. This is natural. It's almost tribal to an extent that it's easier to connect with people that are like us and to get closer and closer to them. So that's those are closed networks. And the problem with the closed networks, even though there's trust and reputation, is you're not getting a lot of new information, right? If you're all very similar, you're likely to have similar networks. You're not likely to be getting new and different and distinct information. Chances are there's not a huge amount of diversity, and you end up with things like groupthink, where you all sort of have the same point of view that doesn't get questioned. You end up with echo effects, which is everybody sort of bouncing the same idea around to each other over and over again. These are the types of echo chambers that get created on like social media, for example, right? You tend to be friends with the people that are closest to you. You tend to want to see and read things that are about your worldview and that align with your worldview. And so it increases engagement and it just makes you more and more self-assured of your worldview. And so while there's trust and reputation coming here, there's also potential downside. So that's one side of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, there's brokerage. And all I mean by brokerage is bridging two or more unconnected groups or individuals. You could sit in the middle of a network and have all these different contacts all over the place, very few or none of them who know each other. And brokerage is all about, finding out information from diverse sources. You potentially find out earlier because you have access to lots of distinct areas of maybe your organization, maybe your personal life. It's about the exchange of ideas, right? This is where new and distinct information comes from. And it's wonderful for innovation, right? You take ideas from one area of your world and you communicate them effectively to another area. That's innovation, or there's recombination that takes place. And so brokerage is associated with a lot of net positives, both professionally and personally. Now, just like closure, it also has its downsides, right? There's questions of trustworthiness. right? If closure is all about trust, brokerage, people don't know what to make of you. You don't have a lot of people that can sort of triangulate your trustworthiness. There's lots of overload that comes in from trying to navigate a world that's very diverse and filled with people that are coming from all over the place. You're also a single point of failure oftentimes in organizations. But what matters is that in this particular type of situation, you have this access to distinct information, distinct groups of people, and this is coming from your weak ties. If closure is all about strong ties, people that know each other really well and they're very, very tight, weak ties are the people that you either maybe don't know, or they're 1 degree removed from you, they're a friend of a friend, or you're only in touch with them regularly. And this is part of where new and distinct information comes from. And so if you want to think about this from like a metaphor perspective, closure, as far as information is concerned, is a bit like drinking your own bathwater. You're just kind of recycling the same information over and over again. And if that's the case, then that makes brokerage a lot more like fresh water. And so the reason so social capital comes from having greater brokerage in general, because you're having diverse reach, diverse new ideas, exposure to different information. And particularly in our current climate where, job opportunities are becoming harder and harder to come across, headhunters are not necessarily reaching out to people in the way that they have been historically. Odds are, if you're looking for a new job, you're going to find it through your contacts. And if you're going to find it through your contacts, you're much more likely to find better and newer and different information from your weak ties than you are from your closest ties. Because most of the information that your closest ties have, you're going to have figured out and found out already. So that's why we're going to focus on networking in terms of expanding your reach, growing those weak ties, maybe developing those into a little bit stronger ties, but really increasing your access to new and different information. Hopefully that overview gives you a decent level set. Okay, so developing your network remotely. How do we want to think about this? Well, the first reaction when talking about networking, and you saw this in the word cloud, is, well, I'm not good at that. It's hard. It feels gross. I hate networkers. They're inauthentic. They're annoying. I get it. I very much get it. Like, networking just for the sake of networking is gross, right? And so I'm not talking about going to those events where you're all sort of like standing around tables and making, small talk. That's not that important. That's not networking. That's just gross, right? And there's been research that shows that something like over 90% of people don't talk to somebody that they didn't already know because it's uncomfortable, and we're much more familiar with the people that we know, and we'd rather stick with them. So it makes sense. But for those of you that have these feelings, and I totally empathize with that, a friend of mine, a colleague, is doing research that basically says we think about networking typically as just making or even strengthening new ties, making new ties or strengthening existing ties. And that's okay. But actually, networking is about two different things. First, there's the establishment of new ties, sure, but there's also value exchange, and that's giving and taking. And so if you separate this out and think about networking as in terms of those two different aspects, now all of a sudden people actually become much better at one or the other. And so this colleague of mine actually did research looking into personality types and behavioral traits that are associated with each of these two aspects of networking. And you can see that it depends on personality type in terms of your ability to do well or not do as well. So for example, extroversion, people that are extroverted, great at making new ties, maybe good at strengthening ties, but they're not nearly as good as give and take of value exchange. And so that's important. And so I want to draw your attention to two particular things here. The people that viewed networking not as quote unquote networking, but as relationship building, were actually much more likely to not only be good at making new ties or strengthening their existing ties, they were also much better at value exchange, right? They give something and eventually get things in return. And the same is true for openness. Now, openness is one of the big 5 personality types, and it's all about being open to new experiences and new ideas. And so people that are curious, right? Think about openness to some extent as being connected with curiosity. People that are curious also are good at making new ties and also good at giving and exchanging value. And the reason for that is they don't think of establishing new ties as like, oh, I'm going to network with this person. They're like, who is this individual? I'd like to know more about him or her. And if you take that mindset, that's actually going to help sort of get rid of this gross feeling to some extent. And so, part of my reason for putting this up is to say, I hear you when you talk about it being hard. And what I would suggest is that you try to reframe it not as networking, but as relationship building and as something that you're trying to engage in some curiosity, sort of heighten your curiosity as you meet new people and find out about them. And just one final reminder before we jump into the specific tips and tricks, and actually I'm going to pause for some questions in just a moment. You have some biases. We as people have biases when it comes to making new connections. Like I said earlier, like we're biased towards people that are like us, homophily. We're drawn to those that kind of look and think and act like us. We're much more likely to connect with people that are close to us, right? We're somewhat lazy social creatures. And so this is actually from research that was conducted in an office building. And what it showed is that the likelihood of communication on a weekly basis fell off dramatically as soon as you moved further and further from an individual's desk, right? So you're much more likely to talk to the people right next to you or just down the hall than you were further down the hall or downstairs or, of course, in a different building. And so, we tend to repeat contacts with the people that are just right around us. That's obviously changing now in our current working, virtual working environment. And then finally, inertia, right? We repeat the same interactions and communications over and over again, right? That's relationship development, but it also means we sort of get stuck in our current social climate. And in fact, there was some research that came out of Microsoft during the crisis that suggested that people's network churn was more or less stable during the crisis. And what that meant was people weren't establishing new ties. They weren't getting rid of old ties either. It meant they just sort of were hunkering down with their core team and their core group of people that they were used to connecting with. And so, what you have here is not expansion of networks. And that's important. And so, it was possible to overcome these biases in an office environment, right? You could actually encounter someone by accident, whether at lunch or grabbing coffee or just passing them in the hallway. And in a social environment where you weren't intentionally keeping distant from people, maybe on the weekends, you're likely to run into friends of friends. All of these things in the prior world were possible. It's just much less likely now when you're either by choice or by law forced to keep your distance from most people, maybe stay in your homes, not go into the office. And so once COVID has now sort of changed our landscape and changed our social worlds, what is it that you can do now? And so, Nida, I think this might be a good place to pause. We're about 20 odd minutes in to see if there's any questions that have come from the group yet.
Oh, we do have questions, Noah. Absolutely.
Okay.
So the first one, which I find very interesting is, so do these tips work regardless of cultural context? So, we have such a global community, right, present, obviously, from that first exercise you had us go through. How does that transfer?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And honestly, a lot of these are going to be universal with the caveat that you need to pay attention to sort of local cultures and customs and things like that, right? It skews Western. That's where a lot of the research has been done on networks and networking and the way that people feel about networking. And so, that certainly underlies a lot of what I'm talking about here. But that said, I'm specifically presenting things that are generally applicable and that should be able to carry over regardless of where you are in the kind of cultural environment you're dealing in. Now, I know that, for example, like Japanese business culture tends to be very formal, very hierarchical. And so maybe reaching out to senior people in an organization, that might not play the same way that it would in London, for example. But the idea with some of the suggestions I'm going to make is to find ways so that that's not necessarily going to step on any cultural toes, so to speak. So a great question. There are differences by culture for sure. The hope is that these are fairly universal.
Okay. So I think one of the other questions that kept coming up was, you talk about the core group of people, right? And then this expanded group. Are you suggesting that we don't invest time in our core group of people anymore? So my team at work, my closest friends, like we should, how do we manage that if that's really where we're working towards right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. And absolutely do not stop investing in your core group of people. That's not going to go well. People will be very unhappy with you. I think my wife is actually watching this webinar from like 3 rooms down, so I'm not going to tell you not to invest in your core group of people, of course. But no, the point is, especially when we are socially distanced, we fall back on our core group naturally. So you're naturally going to be spending time investing in those relationships, reconnecting with people. I think a lot of people saw, especially at the beginning of the crisis, reconnecting with old close ties, ties that were close previously that maybe over, the last couple of years, or if you've had kids or you've moved or whatever, kind of fell off a little bit. It's like, wait, we're now home all the time. Let's reconnect with those good friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the core group is going to get lots of attention. And the point is, in the prior world, when we were in offices and didn't have to socially distance, you could actually, without too much thought and planning, kind of get away with networking and expanding your network that way. And that's just not really the case anymore. And so the point is to carve out time and to change your mindset to be like, okay, I actually have to proactively be thoughtful about network expansion beyond my core group. That's just going to happen naturally. And so the point is, how can I build from that as my foundation and also expand? So do not stop investing in your core group at all. That would never be a suggestion of mine.
Good to know. One more question, and then and it's a two-part question, and then we'll kind of continue with your presentation. But I feel like I'm a broker. Like I try to be a broker as much as possible. That really speaks to me, but I do find it exhausting, right? I guess any recommendations, but I'm also an extrovert, so I think it comes a little bit more maybe naturally to me. So one is, how do you manage that for anyone, especially with Zoom exhaustion and how we are sort of networking these days is different than in person? And also, if you're an introvert, how does that change? And where do you really need to lean into to kind of manage the downsides of brokering, right?
Sure. So yeah, the overload and even cognitive dissonance, right? And trying to hold two opposing ideas in your brain at the same time without kind of totally melting down is pretty common amongst brokers. And there's a couple ways around it, right? If in an organization you find yourself as sort of a single point of failure, kind of everybody goes through you, it can feel even more overwhelming now when you're working remotely and all of a sudden you're just inundated with emails and chats and Zoom calls and what have you. And so I think a couple things to keep in mind about being a broker is, one, you're always capable of closing the disconnections in your network, right? I said social capital is about connections and disconnections in your network. And you become a broker, or you are a broker as a function of the fact that your connections aren't connected to each other, right? You're bridging unconnected groups. And so, if it makes more sense for two people or two groups in your network to not have to go through you every time, sure, you lose some of the value by being that information centerpiece, but you also gain back some of your life by the fact that you're no longer the go-between all the time. And so drawing connections between people in your network is absolutely something that's obviously viewed positively from a social capital perspective, and it also eases the burden on you. That's one way. Another way is to think about building in some redundancy. A lot of times in organizations, brokers tend to feel like they're the only one that lots of people come to. And that may or may not be true, but if it feels that way, that can feel quite overwhelming. And so part of the idea is to be thoughtful about building in redundancy and the fact that that takes a while, right? People come to you as a broker because they see your value and you understand them and you understand the lay of the land in the organization. And so they're going to want to reach out to you specifically. And so, the way that you alleviate some of that burden is by bringing in somebody else or even part of your team as a means of helping to diffuse that responsibility. But you have to remember that if the trust is largely in you as the broker, it's going to take time for people to adapt to someone new or a new group of people that are starting to fill that role. And so in the event that you decide to build in that redundancy, it's going to take time. You have to bring people along, introduce them, establish their trust, let your contacts know that these are the people that you trust the most. They're going to be slowly, taking over part of your role. And so building in that redundancy is going to be really important. So making those connections when you can, building in redundancy, but recognizing that it takes time. And then you asked about introversion. Let's hold off on that. I think part of the idea behind the checklist that I'm giving is with it in mind that this should be applicable to everyone. And introverts, I think, introversion doesn't necessarily mean that you don't talk to other people. I know plenty of very social introverts. It's where do you get your energy from? And so, introverts basically have to kind of psych themselves up for the fact that they're going to be expending a lot of energy doing these sorts of things. I will say that in some respects, this is kind of your time to shine, right? You don't have to actually interact with people. You can talk to them via Zoom or communicate via text or other video conferences, video chat software. And so, you know, it's not nearly as exhausting from the like energy expenditure just to deal with other people. There's other reasons it's exhausting, right? Zoom fatigue and screen fatigue. But I do think that introverts actually might even have a little bit of a leg up in the current environment. I may be wrong. I'm an extrovert, so I can't speak from personal experience. But the idea here is like, okay, how do you psych yourself up to do this? And the way you do it is actually by having some plans and having a routine.
Great.
Sound good for now?
Yeah, sounds good. I'll see you back in a few minutes.
Okay. All right. Let's continue. So this is where we are, right? It was possible to overcome your biases in an office environment and a non-socially distant environment, but what do you do now? And so you have to start off by forming a new habit. And you can think of this as a lot of the research on this actually comes from a colleague of mine, Koku Abara, who's in Singapore, who talks about networking in the same way that you would think about networking in a similar fashion that you would think about trying to get in shape. Right? It's something that you have to do regularly. It's something that you have to get up and kind of routinely go through the motions, go to the gym, get out and run, whatever it is. You don't get in shape by thinking that, okay, if only I were better at getting in shape, or if only I could work up the courage, or if only I read a book that told me how to be better at the gym. Those things help, but that's not actually how you get fit. You get fit by doing it over and over again. And so this may seem off-putting, but I want you to keep in mind that networking, right? Work is in there. 1% inspiration, 1% reading the books, knowing how to read people, being extroverted, whatever, and 99% doing the work. It's really about getting out there and establishing the habit, the practice of doing this regularly. And, for those of you that are thinking, well, that's just going to feel gross because I'm doing it because some OB professor standing in his home office outside of Paris, tells me to do it. I hear you. I have what I hope is a suitable response for that. We'll get to it in just a minute. But how do you form new habits? Well, the best way to go about doing it, and there's lots of books out there about that, but here's a checklist. And like I said, this is going to be fairly text heavy. The idea being that you can take these and use them as a little bit of guidance as you think about establishing your own networking practice. First of all, have a plan, right? Determine your goals. And this could be within your organization. It could also be more personally. It could be professionally, broadly speaking, right? Within your industry or trying to find new jobs in different industries. Think about where is it that you would like to be in the next 1 to 3 years? And how are you going to work back from there to think about who are the people or the types of people or the organizations that I need to be in touch with in order to make those goals happen? And check in regularly, right? Like I said at the beginning, social capital matters a lot. How much time are you dedicating to this? Are you setting aside a couple hours every month as a means of doing this, maybe even every week? That's part of the establishment of a new habit. Secondly, you have to track your behavior, right? Have a log, use a to-do app, whatever it might be, set reminders, set little pings that, like when your alarm goes off at 5:30 in the morning to get up and go to the gym or to go out and have a run, you're annoyed, but you kind of do it because that's how you get yourself ready for whatever it is you're training for or get yourself in shape, right? Set those alarms, roll your eyes when they first start to ring. You have to practice regularly. Create a to-do list called contacts. And then what do you put in there? And before I show you the next step, know that a lot of this is coming from Keith Ferrazzi's Never Eat Alone, which talks very, very much through the sort of step-by-step ways of how do you grow your network. And it can seem very overwhelming. And so first of all, this is probably going to be more geared for a slightly more junior audience, right? If you're particularly senior, this is not necessarily going to be something you feel like you have the time or the inclination to do, even though maybe you should to some extent. But the idea is not to feel like, okay, I have to do all of this that I'm about to see. The idea is if you do 5 to 10% of this, you're already going to be establishing new habits and making sort of strides towards growing your network. So what do I do? What do I do now that I've got this to-do app? I've set up contacts. You have to figure out the who. You want a maximum of 50 to 100. And that sounds like a lot. It's not, I promise you. That goes very, very quickly. And what we're talking about here is not necessarily ties that you don't know. It's not necessarily about establishing totally new ties, although that can be in there. It's about medium ties, people that you know reasonably well, who you want to strengthen the relationship, or weak ties, you haven't talked to them in a while, you've only talked to them a few times, that you want to cultivate a little bit better over the next 1 to 2 years. If there are people on your list who you absolutely have to get to know that you don't know at all, warm introductions are the way to go, right? I'll talk about cold calls and cold emails in a minute, and the response rate's usually not very high. So if there's someone you absolutely need to cultivate a relationship with, get warm introductions. Now that you've got your list, you've figured out the who, sort them into B categories. These are your medium ties, contact 3 to 4 times a year, your C ties, your weaker ties. Just keep them updated on what you're doing, what's going on, checking in, and then start pinging people. This is the habit. 2 to 3 people per week, maybe more, maybe less, but the idea is to build in this habit. Even if it's just 1 person per week, you've now added 50 plus people to your regular exchanges on a yearly basis. That's a lot, right? We tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in a short period of time and underestimate when we start to aggregate and look at longer time horizons. 50 people that you haven't spoken to in several years that you've reconnected with in the next year, that's a lot. And so again, this is the idea of taking baby steps and building that habit, build that routine, set aside the time to do it. Some tips and reminders for this. Number 1, the 80-20 rule. As for just about everything, 80% of networking is simply being in touch regularly, right? I have a good friend in academia who reaches out to me once every, 2 months or so. And it's super nice emails, we're buddies, but I know exactly what he's doing. He's just kind of pinging to stay in touch. And it's great. I love hearing from him because we have an established relationship already. We're not super tight, but he's a friend. And so this is just nice to stay in touch regularly. And it's somebody professionally that I'm consistently in touch with. People like to hear from you, even if it's just a short 1 or 2 sentence email. How you doing? What's going on? Right? Especially in our current environment, people like to feel like people are thinking about them and checking in on them. Oh, I heard this song. It reminded me of you. I read this article. It reminded me of something we once talked about. Come up with a reason to connect, and all the better. Number 2, don't be afraid to take long shots if it's somebody who's really, really interesting to you, right? If it's somebody that you really feel like you have to get in touch with, don't hesitate. But keep in mind that for cold calls, cold emails, you're looking at like maybe a 5% hit rate. And so it becomes a numbers game. If you have 20 people that are really, really important to you, you reach out to all of them, you're likely to get 1 or 2 of them that are willing to connect with you. And so keep those long shots in mind. Number 3, and I said this was one of my key takeaways, whatever you do, do your homework, right? I get a lot of emails from people that maybe want to be PhD students or RAs, and they're like, hi, you're an OB professor. I would love to connect with you about this particular research topic. Very generic, has no real read of who I am and what I do. I'm very, very unlikely to respond to that. I usually respond to most emails because I feel like it's worth just saying, thanks for reaching out, sorry. However, if somebody reaches out to me, hey, I see that you do work on networks and you're interested in innovation and creativity, especially in the music industry. Here's who I am, would love to connect. Almost always, I will reach back out to that person. Happy to connect with people because they've made it clear that they're reaching out to me for a reason. They've done their homework. They know who I am. You have to do the same. If you're going to reach out to anybody new, different, even somebody you haven't talked to in a long time, do a little bit of work. Most people have an array of information about them online, whether LinkedIn, social media site of choice, whatever. Use that to your advantage, right? Find out who these people are, reach out to them with a specific reason, with a story for why you're reaching out to them, and also have your own story. I'm interested in X and Y. You're somebody who focuses on X and Y. It would be really helpful to me if we were able to connect. Do your homework. Number 4, right? It sort of flips the script a little bit. Change your behavior first and your attitude will follow, right? If you think about like, I just need to sort of psych myself up to do this more often, you're never gonna do it. You're only going to change your attitude by changing your behavior first. Again, think about it like going to the gym. If you start going regularly, those first weeks, maybe even first months, for some people first years, are miserable. But after enough time, you suddenly are like, I can't really live without this. I kind of have to do it. And your attitude changes towards it because your behavior changed first, not the other way around. Repetition is far more powerful than willpower, than internal willpower. And while I say that, I also recommend being kind to yourself. You're not going to have massive changes right away. If you set your expectation that that's going to be the case, you're not going to reach them and you're going to give up quickly. Small changes add up over time. And then finally, to get connected, make connections. right? If you're somebody who easily makes connections between people, you're much more likely to have people want to return the favor. Use reciprocity to your advantage. We are built to return favors, right? It's part of our pro-social genetic code. When people do a favor for us, we're automatically inclined to want to return the favor. So use that to your advantage. Be somebody that makes connections, and people are then going to help make connections for you. Okay. So speaking of giving and reciprocity, my second big idea here is to take a page from academia and take advantage of the fact that everybody is on Zoom. So you don't have to make big physical investments necessarily to meet people. And I suggest that all of you, regardless of where you are in your career, what stage, what level, et cetera, host office hours. And to tell you a little bit about this, I'm going to tell you my own little story. This is a LinkedIn post that I put up about 2 months ago at the beginning of the crisis, when I was feeling like a non-contributing zero as the world around me felt like it was burning. And I said, I've got 2 little kids, I'm working from home, like, what do I have to offer? I have a little bit of time, not big chunks of time, a little bit of time and some knowledge. So what am I going to do? As a professor, we host office hours. So I decided I'll put it out there. Maybe 2 people will respond, and I'll thank my sister for signing up, and that'll be that, and I'll move on. Or maybe people will have interest in this. I don't know. So I posted this, right? I'm going to hold virtual office hours open to anyone who wants 15 to 30 minutes, sign up for a Zoom meeting. I had put a Google Doc initially, and I explained I'm doing this because for the reasons I just gave, right? I felt like this was the best way that I could help others in this particular time. I could give, I could establish some reciprocity, and frankly, I could actually make weak ties or people that I didn't know come to me. If I'm not out there meeting new students like I do regularly when I'm teaching face-to-face, how is it that I can continue to make these weak ties and meet new people in the current environment? And the best way to do that is to get them to come to me, right? Instead of establishing this routine of reaching out to people regularly and this new habit, why not get them to come to me? And so this is what I put out there. And I filled up like 40 blocks in 3 hours and added another 40 blocks and it filled up in another 3 hours. And now I've continued it. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience. And if you're sitting there going, well, I'm not a professor, I don't have anything to offer, I have a response for you, and you're wrong about that. You absolutely have something to offer. Any of the, however many hundreds of you are watching this right now, there's guaranteed to be some people who would like to connect with you and would like to learn more about you, to hear about your experience. The question is, how do you reach them? Well, if this is what you want to do, and I cannot recommend highly enough that you try this. This has actually been an overwhelming surprise of positivity for me. I thought, okay, so a bunch of people signed up. It's going to be annoying, little nitpicky questions. It hasn't been that at all. I've talked to people from all over the world, ranging from the Ukraine to Singapore to Australia to New Zealand to the US to Mexico to South America, all industries, all career stages. And people found me on LinkedIn, people that I'm not even connected to. Right? They found the post and they signed up for it. And so you'd be amazed at the reach that you can get if you get enough people that like it and start to share it with their networks. All of a sudden you expand your network, and that's really where the weak ties come in. And I've had at this point 50 to 60 calls like this, 15 minutes each, short, right? I'd say that 90+% of them have been enjoyable, useful, or both. And so it was something that I was worried, this is going to be annoying little nitpicky calls. Somebody wants to get an MBA at INSEAD, so they come to me. That has almost never been the case. So if you want to do this, here's my advice. You're welcome to take this post and use it as an example. What I suggest you do is you block 1 to 2 hours of 15, 20, or 30 minutes, whatever you want, every week or two. That's it. It doesn't have to be aggressive, nothing serious. Calendly is a good tool for allowing people to sign up. And ask people to give you, 2 sentences about why it is that they're reaching out to you, right? You want to have some barrier to entry so that you're not just getting random people. And if people don't fill that out, then you cut them off the schedule. I've only had to do that twice. Secondly, announce to the world that you're open for conversations. Now that could be LinkedIn or Facebook and social media. It could be your company intranet. It could be your broader team. Whatever it is, you open yourself up and you say, hey, look, I'm hosting these 15-minute conversations, right? That's not a massive investment, but especially if you have a couple of sentences of introduction coming to you beforehand, you can actually accomplish a lot. And it also minimizes your downside, right? God forbid you get on a call and the person's, annoying, this isn't worthwhile, whatever. You only have to suffer through 12 more minutes if you're socially graceful. And if you're not socially graceful, you could always hang up, not necessarily recommended, but that option is there to you, right? You don't have to leave. You don't have a big personal physical investment or a big time investment on any given call here. Dissuade your closer friends from signing up. I had a number of people that were like, hey, haven't talked to you in a while. Would love to grab 30 minutes. I'm like, yes, email me separately. This is for people that I'm either reconnecting with after a while or I don't know. Close friends will make time, right? The close ties, that's not a problem. Wash, rinse, repeat. If you do 4 of these per week, that's 1 hour per week, and you do it for 30 weeks a year, that's 120 conversations per year. That's a lot. That is a big difference maker in terms of growing your network of weak ties and of reach across lots of different people. And I know what you're saying. You're like, but I can't do this for this reason and that reason, but there's all these good reasons why I shouldn't do this. Zoom fatigue. Okay, you're committing 1 additional hour per week. I guarantee that you can cut out 1 additional thing that you've been doing that takes about an hour per week and find time to do this, right? Zoom fatigue is real. You have to keep in mind that, again, if social capital matters, if weak ties matter, this is how you get them to come to you. This is actually like a minimal investment. And so it counterbalances that Zoom fatigue pretty well, I think. I've also actually found these calls to be quite energizing and interesting. Number 2, what about useless meetings? What about dumb meetings? It just hasn't really happened. You need a good screening tool, and it's as simple as, please give me two sentences about why you want to talk to me, right? That encourages people to be thoughtful about it, and if you give them 15 minutes or 20 minutes, they get to the point, right? And so the idea is like, how can I be of help to them in a relatively short amount of time? I ask them to tell me a little bit of background, and now I've had some connection with somebody, and I've learned a little bit about where they are, what they're doing, what they're trying to do with their career. I've had a number of people say, well, what about people trying to sell me something? That hasn't happened once. Maybe if you're a C-suite member of a bigger organization, that might happen. Again, you can find barriers to stop that, or people do that, you just hang up the call. It's really not that big of an investment. And then finally, many of you, especially maybe you're more junior, you might be saying, well, I don't have anything interesting to offer. You're a professor. Of course, people are going to come to you for office hours. Maybe so. However, I guarantee there are people around the world who would have interest in talking to you, whoever you are, about your experience, your background, your expertise. And there's a psychological phenomenon called the curse of knowledge. And basically what that means is what we know, we think is simple and easy and obvious because we have the background and it's very fluid for us. It's quite easy. And so we assume that because we know it and it's simple and obvious and easy, that everybody else kind of knows it and it's simple and obvious for them too. And that's actually not the case. Very few people have the same background and series of expertise and experiences that you do. And so I would encourage you, put yourself out there, and I think you will find that you have much more to offer than you think you do, and there's much greater diversity out there that has interest in whatever it is that you're doing. So keep in mind that there's this curse of knowledge, and by putting yourself out there, you'll recognize that you actually have more to offer than you think you do. This brings me to my final takeaway here. Build your personal board of directors, right? Now is a great time to invest in a group of people who are going to help you throughout your career, right? You go to them for advice, for direction, for guidance, sometimes on short notice when you need it. This could be really structured, and that's what I'm gonna tell you about, or it could be more informal. It's whatever you're comfortable with. And the idea is to find mentors, peers, advisors, former colleagues, bosses, professors, people who can kind of give you advice, who can help you through career, who you stay in touch with, but who can really help your direction from a career perspective. You may be asking, well, what's in it for them? So I asked someone on my personal board of directors, why do you do this? Why mentor me? Like, I bring very little to the table. And he, in this case, it was a he, was kind enough to say, I hope at some point in your career, you get to be a mentor to someone like you, just so you understand. It's pretty nice, pretty selfless, pretty warm reason to do something like that. So what does this look like? Well, who are you looking for? People whose experience and judgment you value and you take seriously. People who have admirable skills, whose network can complement or helps your own. They are trustworthy, first and foremost. They care about you personally, right? They want your development, your well-being, your happiness. They hold that important to them. And these are people that you're going to feel comfortable, maybe being a little vulnerable to, asking for help, right? They may not be the closest people, but because you trust them, you're likely to feel okay going to them and saying, look, I'm stuck here. I need some help. I need some assistance. That's not an easy thing to do, which is why you need to be careful about who you sort of have in this position. How do you do it? Number one, no need to DTR. For those of you that don't know what DTR is, define the relationship. You don't need to ask, will you be my mentor? Will you be on my personal board of directors? You can, and I've done that with one or two of the people on the board, and it was sort of awkward. Just nurture the relationships, and that will come along. Aim high. Yes, you can go across the board, and I'll show you my personal board so you have a sense, but don't be afraid to aim high. Look to your weak ties and your friends of friends. Figure out how you can help them either now or in the future. Again, reciprocity matters a lot. Have some patience, some persistence, and thick skin. You're going to be asking them for feedback. You want them to be honest. You have to have the thick skin to take that feedback from people who you admire. Who's my board? Well, the first two on the top left, those are our peers, right? My best friend is the first one on the left. My closest colleague and co-author is the second one. I've got two INSEAD professors, the Patrigliaris, who are a little bit more senior than I am, and who provide a lot of career guidance within INSEAD. On the bottom left are two women who were my bosses for a couple summers about 10 years ago and have remained close mentors and friends. They help me with questions, especially as they relate to the more practitioner world. The next two gentlemen are academics at different institutions. One of them was my PhD advisor and continues to be a close mentor. The other remains someone who I turn to when, again, thinking about bridging academia and the practitioner world. And then the last one, the picture of me with my son, is my 9th and 10th grade English teacher who has maintained a really important role in my life as a mentor and friend, such that our firstborn, there's a little bit of an homage to him in naming our firstborn. So very close mentor, close person there. But you get a sense it's across the board. Some of them professional, some of them personal, some of them more senior, some of them peers. Some of them I've asked, will you be a mentor to me? Some of them have just sort of assumed that role. Very varied. Some tips on engaging. Invest and inform, right? Invest the time, especially when things are going well. People don't want to hear from you just when things suck. And so reach out when things are going well, when you have an achievement to share, an accomplishment. Encourage and welcome feedback, direct, honest feedback. Listen to what they have to say. Take their advice, take it to heart, listen, utilize it, put it to work. Adapt your board to your current and future needs, right? Your board will change over time. And seek the right level of diversity, right? Career stages, industries, goals, etc. A couple things in closing, because I'm running a little long and I want to give some time for questions. The importance of authenticity and curiosity in all of this, right? If who you are and what you do are not overlapping, right? Who you feel yourself to be and your actions are not aligned, you're going to feel inauthentic. And this is when networking feels gross. Reaching out to people, you're like, this isn't who I am, and yet I'm doing it. So I'm not, it doesn't make me happy. But authenticity is about that feeling of alignment between who you are and your behaviors, right? So the more aligned they are, the more likely you're going to feel good about it, and you're more likely to do it more often. And so one way to think about that is curiosity, right? Approach the world as if always have something to learn, right? Don't look at those random calls if you do the office hours as useless. You have an opportunity to learn something about someone you never would have otherwise connected. So maybe there's not a huge amount of value for you directly, but you have an opportunity to learn. If you're curious and you approach the world that way, you're going to be much more likely to actually seek this out. You have that openness. You're going to be much better off at networking. And so final thought, look, if you're authentically curious, networking is not going to feel gross. And if you consider it to be learning or even giving, it might even feel good. With that, I'm going to leave you with a couple of book recommendations, also a podcast called The Reliance Project, which I'm actually going to be on at some point, talking about networks in our current world. And Nida, we've got a few minutes left for questions, so I'm happy to take whatever people have chimed in with.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you. We'll leave the slide up for a little bit so you can just have a look and jot down some of the book names. But somebody, I think, and I think this happens a lot now with the COVID-19 pandemic, they just joined a company remotely, right? So how do you suggest that they go about building their networks there? Coming from not being able to meet people.
Great. That's a great question, because, it's happened to a lot of people. I have friends that are like, oh, I'm starting a new job, or the MBAs that I've been teaching, taught this year. If I'm starting a new job, I'm not going to meet my peers. It's one thing if you've started off by working in the office, then it's sort of easier to reach out. If it's all brand new, that's actually quite a challenge. And so what I would recommend, first and foremost, use your newness to your advantage, right? Send people emails. I'm new here. I'm trying to figure out the lay of the land in a way, in a world where I can't just sort of walk around and get a sense for it. would you mind taking 15, 20 minutes to just connect with me, tell me who you are, what you do, etc. Right? Use newness as a reason to reach out. Most people in most situations are going to be generous with their time, generous with their information to someone who's new, right? Everybody remembers what it's like to be new. And so hopefully you can sort of play that up. Additionally, what I would do is when you have those conversations, not only connect with them and find out about them, but also say, okay, who are the 3 or 4 people you think that I should talk with in the organization, right? Because what you're going to be able to do if you ask a number of people that is start to figure out what does the sort of social network of this organization look like? Who do people turn to for information? Who do they turn to when they've got an issue with something? And so if you say to enough people, who are the 3 or 4 people that you go to and you think I should talk to, you're going to start to figure out, okay, these are the 5 or 6 overall in the organization that I really need to make sure that I connect with. And I guarantee those people, while busy, will also be happy to make connections with new people. Good question.
Good. This is also a good one. I like this one. Where's the line between doing my homework, so when you're reaching out to somebody, and stalking, right? So a bit of what happens when then you don't get a response? Do you remove them from the list? Do you try again? And then also, how do you establish that give and take in maybe going to somebody who's perhaps more senior, who maybe doesn't, at least you feel, or I feel, I don't have a lot to give to them either. So how do you manage that?
So first was about the line between stalking
and stalking.
Right. So I would keep it professional for the most part, unless it's somebody that you're personal friends with. Keep it professional. Keep it to LinkedIn. Don't go to Facebook and ask about like their daughter or something. That's weird. And so, try to do your best to make sure that's about, look, I see that you are working here now, you're living here, because that's in LinkedIn. This is the area, the industry that you're focusing on. It doesn't have to be like, I see you've had a new son 4 months ago. That's great. What's his name? Like, I've seen some pictures. It's like, no, that's too much. And so if you keep it professional, that's likely to keep that barrier between, networking and stalking. So that would be my advice there. The other part of the question was around
what happens if you don't get a response? What do you do? Do you keep trying? You had said that, said that less than 5% actually will write back. At what point do you let it go? Right?
I think, you might send another email 3 months or so later. But, sometimes emails get lost in the shuffle. Some people get hundreds of emails a day. At some point, you just have to say, like, look, this is one of the statistics of people not responding to a cold reach out, and move on and figure out, surely there's not just one person in the world who can fill that particular niche or informational need that you might have. And so, send one email reminder. Don't badger people, because maybe they actually did want to get back to you. Maybe something personal is going on, maybe whatever. You send a reminder 2-3 months later, or a second email 2-3 months later, maybe they'll be like, oh my God, I totally forgot. Yeah. They might, and they might not. And if they don't, it's not necessarily about you. It's not like, who's this person? I don't want to talk to them. It's just, they've got lots of other things going on. And so figure out if there's ways you can find replacements and move on.
Okay, great. Well, final quick question. How do you use LinkedIn? Like, do you accept anyone? How is that in terms of your reach? How's best to use that platform?
The big question, the $1 million question, even though LinkedIn is free. I think there's 2 approaches, right? There's I only connect with people that I know because I can vouch for them and I know them personally and I'm happy to make introductions, or I kind of let in everybody and it all sort of falls apart to some extent. And actually, when I became a professor, I went from the former to the latter. I don't know why. At some point I did. And once you sort of let that slide, it's all over. And I was annoyed at myself for a while, and I was debating, do I like create a new LinkedIn profile and start over? And then I realized that actually, by letting in all these people that I don't necessarily know, my LinkedIn feed is much more diverse and has much greater reach and range than it would have if I just kept to the people that I know and that I meet and have met in person. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that I can't necessarily make introductions. Someone might come to, look at my LinkedIn connection list and say, what is it that I should be, can I reach out to this person? And I'll be like, I don't know that person. But it means that my LinkedIn feed is pretty good in terms of giving me a wide reach of news, of information, of things going on around the world. So if you reframe it in that way, it's really what you're comfortable with and what you want to get out of it.
Okay. Well, thank you, Noah, so much. I know one of the comments actually in the Q&A was how inspiring and motivating you are. And I think a call to action for us all to get out of this COVID shell. So thank you for bringing us one step closer to that. I think some great tips. Thank you for the book recommendations. We look forward to following you on LinkedIn. So I think the open invitation is there for us all to connect with you.
Sure.
And I know going forward, we do have some more webinars scheduled for this week and into the next week. So hopefully you guys will all stay tuned for our wonderful lifelong learning platform, and do connect with us on lifelong learning on LinkedIn as well. So, and share please with your friends, and do, when this goes up, it is recorded, you can share it with your network as well. So again, thank you, Noah. We very much appreciate it. And thank you to the audience for staying, for listening. And we hope you learned a lot today. I sure did. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Nita.